There are several types of knowledge. Little a, the common knowledge, that is formed of many immediate evidences, truths and opinions. The immediate and most certain evidence is the one we have just said. Like, for example, this morning the fish is at €22 per kilogram, or my brother has fallen ill. These are certain truths only as they appear to us, without seeing if they are absolute truths, if the price of fish is a real just price, if my brother is actually sick. Opinion is something that you form yourself from insufficient knowledge. For example, I think this man has a bad background. I had some dealings with him that allow me to suspect this. I form an opinion about this man. The view is more or less the same thing. We see that opinion is a kind of hypothesis that we forge ourselves about an object of knowledge that we do not know well. We have certain data about it, which allows us to form a certain idea of it, but not enough to have a certain knowledge of it so that it be obvious. We have the right to form an opinion on a person or on any event, but only if we are well aware of what it represents as knowledge, that is, an imperfect knowledge, a draft of knowledge. The great danger in common knowledge, which unfortunately often happens, as we know, is that we take opinion for a certain truth. For example, we have a certain negative idea of a man and condemn him as if we had the certainty of his guilt. That is how many innocent people have been condemned. Opinion can be formed imperceptibly in us without our realizing it, but it can also be the result of a choice, a desire. When desire takes precedence over knowledge and wants to pass itself off as knowledge. This is something very common in everyday life, where we judge too quickly what is destructive of life in society and already in ourselves, because if what we think does not correspond to reality, it is error, of which we pointed out earlier the serious disadvantages. Opinion is permitted, provided that you are aware of the imperfection of your evidence and certainty, and it's better to wait until you have more data for having more certainty. And it can concern all fields, from simple everyday life to religion. It's why we hear that all religions are equal, because we have not taken the time to get informed to know what it is really about it. We have remained at the door of knowledge, and we judge with confidence what we are not sure about. It is a direct path to death, because it is a path to error. And we have seen that error represents for man. Little b. Above common knowledge, we have what we could call common sense, which we know better as paysan common sense, in French, le bon sens paysan. It is a certain natural logic which comes from a man who has learned how to observe nature, the world around him, with honesty and sagacity, in order to discern in it its evidence, its truth. And an example of this common sense, we have proverbs, which are a kind of compilation of people's wisdom. There are, in general, good rules of conduct, of prudence. It is a certain science, a draft of science, insofar as there is in it a certain certainty, greater, more certain, and deeper than common knowledge, but it is not science, in that it does not really constitute a body of knowledge, coherent, organic, or the art that allows it to be acquired. The logic in it is a little wild, spontaneous, without a clear understanding of its mechanism, and knowledge is often scattered. There may be some consistency, but not as much as in science. There are larger, deeper, more certain truths than in common knowledge, but there is no art in acquiring or verifying them, and therefore they can contain errors. Little c. Thus, we can get that science is above all this, not only understood in the sense that it is actually abusively reduced to physical mathematics and biology, but here we understand science in the sense that we have just said, i.e., an art of acquiring knowledge without risk of error, and at the same time a body of knowledge that is certain, organized in a no less certain, well-ordered manner. In short, science is the art of reaching the truth, and the result of this art. To give an image, common sense is DIY, which can have a certain quality, and science is professionalism. And science is, there is not only one, but several, depending on the subject to be studied. Because it is not the same way of studying inert bodies, bodily life, or the quantity or being in itself, which today belongs respectively to physics, biology, mathematics, or metaphysics. There is a way to classify sciences according to the degree of evidence, of certainty, precisely. And where there is the most evidence, the most certainty, is where the object is the most abstract, contrary to what one might think. Indeed, abstraction is often represented as something nebulous or imaginary, and the strongest reality is a daily, immediate reality. This is true in a sense, because it is in our most immediate reality that existence is found. An abstraction, understood in the current and efficient sense, is a certain misrepresentation of that reality. But philosophical abstraction, as we will see, is not a distance from this concrete reality. It is, on the contrary, a deep rapprochement towards it, towards what makes it more real. And by going more towards what makes reality more real, we have more evidence and certainty, as when we approach the light, because in this way we come closer to being. We have an example in mathematics whose object is more abstract than physics, and which are of greater certainty than physics. For example, it will always be certain in any word that 2 and 2 are 4, while it is not known if Newton's law of gravitation will be the same in any word. To take an image, it must be said that there are several stages, several degrees in reality, in each reality, which go from the peripheral to the heart of reality. And these stages, these degrees, are what we call degrees of abstraction, precisely, which correspond, as we have just said, to degrees of evidence and certainty. From the obvious to the more obvious, we have the physical, mathematical, and metaphysical degrees. That there is less certainty in the physical sciences is also due to the fact that the physical sciences are experimental, while the mathematical and metaphysical sciences are rational. In experimental science, in fact, we proceed by hypothesis and establishment of theories. We experiment, observe, formulate a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, and establish a theory from there. If new data, challenge the first theory, we are forced to reformulate another hypothesis, verify it, and establish another theory. It puts us in a certain uncertainty, but it's normal. It's a natural approach of experimental science. In this field, natural truth has a permanent character of uncertainty, because we never know if new discoveries will not call into question what we had established. The danger is that some bad intentions want us to believe that everything is like that any truth is likely to be challenged by new discoveries and to be the object of new theories, which is completely false, because not all science is experimental. There are rational sciences which derive their data from sensitive experience, but we do not derive their certainty from sensitive experience, but from reason, such as, for example, Pythagoras' theorem, because reason clearly sees that it is so and that it cannot be otherwise, whatever the experience. So there are sciences that are not experimental and that can make us know absolutely certain truths, all the more certain as we get closer to the heart of being. This is the case with metaphysics, more than mathematics. Therefore, it is not true that all truths can be challenged by new discoveries, because there are natural truths that do not come from verified hypotheses, but are clearly observed by reason. You know? This is very important because the knowledge that refers today is these physical, mathematical, and biological sciences. And if we believe that they are the best in terms of certainty, we are no longer certain of anything, because it is true that, to a certain extent, today's theories can be challenged tomorrow. And if this is the case for everything, there is no longer any truth, and we fall into the serious disadvantages that we pointed out earlier, namely the death of man in what is best in him, and of society, which is what is happening today. Our world is dying from the lack of reference points, of certainties. We must give it back certainties. So much for the field of natural truth. Second, thus we can discover by ourselves many truths and certain truths, very important truths. We will see, for example, in this first year, how we demonstrate the existence of God with the greatest certainty, with our only reason and from experience. Many people believe that faith is believing that God exists, but this is completely false. And St. Paul reminds us in his epistle to the Romans, in the first chapter. The existence of God, says St. Paul, is knowable by natural reason, and not only can we thus discover the existence of God, but we must discover it of all necessity. For faith is believing in what God says, and to believe in what God says, we must know that He exists and know a minimum of His perfections, to know that He is worthy of faith. Because it is not a question of giving our faith to anyone. You understand? We will see that we can also know many things about God Himself in this way, which will lead us to a good path of certainty towards the knowledge of the mysteries of God through faith. We must have an adult faith, which we take in charge, and not remain at a simple belief inherited from our family, which has had its usefulness, and for that you must have solid reasons to believe, and it is philosophy, the right, that give them, and not faith. We'll see all that in detail. And the importance of these 2 years of preparation, especially the first, to access an adult faith, a face capable of responding to all the attacks of this corrupt world. So natural reason, human intelligence, can know very certain and very great truths, but it is nevertheless limited. We know it only too well. It is subject to error and does not go very far, although it can go quite far. We can know what God is to a certain extent from His creation, but we cannot know what He really is in Himself, His mysteries, as, for example, that He is Trinity, that is, one God in three persons. We can know for ourselves that our soul is immortal, but we cannot know what it will become after death. We can know many things by reason, even about God or about angels, but not what will happen after death, nor God's intention about us. We can only make assumptions about it. What we think in everything we do, in everything we know, is happiness, but we don't know much about it, nor how to achieve it. True philosophy teaches us that, in fact, we see the being in its absolute, the absolute good, which corresponds to God, in a sense, but we do not know much about it or how to reach it. It is a fact that God came to respond to this natural desire of man. God revealed Himself to us. God spoke to us. God made His word known to us. It is a fact, which is not destructible by reason, because this fact depends on the sovereign freedom of God. We would have suspected this a little bit, because when we discover only by reason how good God must be, and in what misery we are, we suspect that He was not going to leave us in this state. But absolutely speaking, by ourselves, we could not know anything about it. God has spoken to us. It is a fact. He has come to bring the answer to our question, where is the happiness for which we are made, and how to reach it? This is attested to us by the Catholic Church, and we can trust her, because the Catholic Church is God on earth. We will show it over these 3 years, but already now in brief. First of all, we must know that we absolutely need a guarantor of the Word of God. Even if God Himself were to speak to me personally, I would still need a guarantor who would certify that it is God who is speaking to me, because I cannot judge for myself. If, for example, I read for the first time, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. If nothing else certifies to me that it is God who speaks, I cannot know it by myself. I cannot judge it only by what is said. This is also the case with a human person. Suppose as the President of the United States have wrote to me, to be sure that it is very him who have wrote to me, I have still to check up this, because, referring only to the content of the letter, I cannot know this. And so, among all the religions of the world, including the Catholic one, when we are offered a text as coming from God, as the Quran, that would have come through the angel Gabriel and the so-called prophet Mohammed, we need an assurance, moreover, that it is indeed God who spoke, because even a multitude of men would be all agreeing together to assure that it would be not enough. The Catholic Church certifies to us that the Bible is truly the Word of God and guarantees its authenticity. Where does the Catholic Church get its power from? The Church was instituted by Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ, when he was on earth, has sufficiently shown that he was God, not only a great prophet, which everyone had recognized in his time, but God himself, through all kinds of wonders, miracles that no one else had never been able to do to the world, like raising the dead. We will take more about it in due course. And if Jesus Christ is God, Jesus Christ manifested to the world, it is God revealing himself to the world. It is God's revelation. And indeed, in Jesus Christ, it is God revealing himself in fullness. Before Jesus Christ, God manifested himself in a progressive and fragmentary way in what is so-called the Old Testament, through his patriarchs and prophets. And after Jesus Christ, we had as an explanation of what Jesus Christ has brought us as a message through the Church and her teachers. The Church was instituted by Jesus Christ as its extension, so that the Church is Jesus Christ continued on earth and therefore God himself. What it is meaning? First, this is what Jesus Christ said to his apostles before ascending to heaven after his passion and resurrection, after gathering them on a mountain. Matthew 28:20. All power has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore, teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to keep all I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, until the end of the world. And in another place Jesus said to Saint Peter, You are Peter, and on this stone I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail over it. When Jesus says, I am with you always until the end of the world, he says it, of course, to all of us, but above all to Saint Peter and his apostles gathered around him. And if he says, to the end of the world, it means that these words are not only addressed to Saint Peter, to the apostles, but also to all their successors until the end of the world, that is, to each pope and to the bishops gathered around him. And when Jesus said to Peter, "You are the stone on which I will build my church," it means that the church is not the work of man, but of God. It is God who builds in Jesus Christ. And it is the work of God with men, for the church is built on a man, Peter. It rests entirely on the shoulders of a man, Peter, and by succession, according to the same will of Jesus Christ, on each pope, successor of Saint Peter, and the church, it is men, first the bishops, and then the faithful, who rest on the shoulders of Saint Peter. It is an inverse pyramid. You are the stone on which I will build my church, said Jesus. If we grant this word with the previous one, behold, I am with you every day until the end of the world, we must see there Saint Peter and the apostles gathered around Saint Peter, as it was said, as the church, composed first of Saint Peter and the apostles gathered around Saint Peter, and then of their successors, that is, the Pope and the bishops gathered around the Pope. It must be said, therefore, that the Church, that is, the organ of God to make us know His word, above all, is truly there, where the Pope and the bishops gather to the Pope are, because it is Jesus Christ, God, extended by them on earth, according to His promise. This does not mean that the Pope alone or a bishop alone has no authority in this field, especially the Pope, as the supreme head of whom the whole Church rests, but that there is truly the Church, in which we can have complete confidence as the organ of God Himself on earth to communicate His word to us. This is the Church where the Pope and the bishops gathered around the Pope are. All right, end of the second part.